The unfortunate nature of the culture war is that it was never entirely real to begin with. For some, the fight against woke ideology was a sincere moral resistance, but for others, it was just a performance. A grift dressed up as conviction and optimized for clicks and algorithmic reach. Now, for a time, the commentary class on YouTube, especially those among the centrist libertarian influencers, rallied against woke ideology in gaming and other media, and in corporate branding. Their audiences demanded it, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the tide could turn. But over the past year, the spectacle of anti-woke critique lost its novelty, and now a new target has emerged: Christianity. Now, I've watched this narrative pivot in real time. Smash JQ's content was really where I had begun to see the shift, with videos and written articles framing Christian voices as the next ideological threat to creative freedom somehow. And so Smash JQ, among other influencers who had once positioned themselves as defenders of our liberties, were now turning their rhetorical weapons against Christians, treating moral convictions as some kind of new authoritarianism, which is ironic given how powerless Christians are right now within the current state and its institutions. Anyway, it is within this context that Madam Savvy enters, and here's what I know about her. Madam Savvy first entered my radar back in 2024. It was when she posted a series of clips lambasting Dustborn, a game so transparently woke it practically begged for backlash. And looking back, it was easy to side with people like her. Dustborn was a far-left fever dream, mechanically manipulative, narratively smug, and ideologically overdetermined. And that's all putting it lightly. Savvy's resistance, alongside so many others who were trashing woke games, felt righteous. But time wounds all heals. Now, the deeper I looked into her content, the more her persona revealed itself as not adhering to any coherent worldviews. On X, she often notes she's married to a man, yet she repeatedly foregrounds her bisexual identity and even invokes it as a shield in some of her online skirmishes. In good faith, I ought to assume she was just joking or being sarcastic, but then again, I do remember that John De La Rose made sarcastic posts aimed at groups on X, and Savvy didn't offer him any grace, so you see the contradiction here. Regardless, Madam Savvy, who is she? She's a disabled woman of immigrant parents, and also erotically fixated on Japanese homosexual pornography. Oh, she's also professionally tied to the production of adult content herself. Something also worth mentioning is that she has shown her feet on demand during a male streamer's broadcast. I suppose it's just a normal act of exhibitionism for someone who is not her husband.
Flag Ninja with a 29 months. The only thing weaker than Beardo's legs is his refusal to 1v1 Savvy. Thanks. At least I showed my legs. Savvy hasn't shown her feet. R.I.P. Bad Wolf with a $10. Savvy's...
There they are!
There you go, Dan.
And in recent days, Madam Savvy has been vocally opposing the efforts of Collective Shout, an Australian NGO pressuring payment processors to remove pornographic content from various platforms like Steam. Now, she frames her objections as a defense of freedom of expression, but the reality, I fear, is far more self-interested. After all, her business does depend on the sale and circulation of pornography, so you can see the conflict there. Is this really about artistic liberty, or is it just about preserving access for consumers who want to indulge in their vices? I guess the only other thing worth bringing up here is this isn't her first foray with Collective Shout. Due to pressures from Collective Shout, we know that Steam removed a rape simulator game, and this perturbed Savvy something fierce. Why? Is the key to saving the West somehow hidden within this game? Why do you want a rape simulator game on Steam, Savvy? Why? Anyway, let's talk about her recent clash with John De La Rose. Because John had the audacity, the utter audacity, to promote his book on X. Now, the nonsense didn't begin with Madam Savvy. John was just making an unsolicited insertion below someone else's post. He responded to himself saying JDA is exposing modernism in a way more important way. This was paired with promotional imagery for his new book, Churchianity, a manifesto calling for Christians to reject modernity and reclaim cultural leadership. Amen to that. And Savvy's response? She detonated. She made posts that were profane, theatrical, and emotionally saturated. She accused John of using pronouns to sell his books, of beating women, of posting furry porn, of engaging with Nazi-adjacent imagery, and taking glee in suicide. She invoked stolen imagery, cultic manipulation, and other things. Just fuck off, she said, every word punctuated by a period. I think she's serious. She's going full scorched earth on John. And John, of course, responded with the following.
Who's scruffy looking?
Actually, John simply responded that he would be praying for her. Hopefully he's sincere. So in a word, Savvy was angry. And in another word, she was being hateful. And this all brings me to her monologue on the decline of the Western AAA gaming industry in a video entitled, Why is AAA Gaming Full of Anger and Hate? Oh, is that irony? Now, here I want to establish that Madam Savvy is what happens when you mix raw emotional energy with zero philosophical ballast. In other words, she's a woman. Her monologue is a sweeping indictment of the games industry. ESG, DEI, identity politics, creative collapse, the loss of imagination, etc., etc. And sure, it all lands with some emotional punch, but beneath it all, it's hollow. There's no architecture, no transcendent standard. It's nothing but vibes and volume. Actually, her voice is pretty soft, so maybe not so much the volume. But anyway, let's get to this point by point.
The AAA gaming industry in the West certainly is going through quite the odd time. Thanks to a lowering in standards for hiring practices and the tomfoolery of ESG investment scoring, we're left with a lot of very angry and hateful individuals making games when they don't really seem to like the customer base. Across the board, all the studios we used to blindly buy from have been hijacked and recycled into vehicles of pandering instead of creativity. The initial creators that we all love, from Neverwinter Nights to Mass Effects to anything in between in the West, are all gone and replaced with something more hideous and concerning from a mental health standpoint.
Oh, spare me the melodrama. We all blindly bought games. Speak for yourself. Nobody just yanks shiny boxes off the shelf like a toddler in a cereal aisle. People ought to be buying with discernment. You know, a thing called standards? Maybe try it sometime before you project your consumer slop habits onto the rest of us. Now let's get something straight here. The so-called invaders who replaced your beloved developers didn't just materialize in the night like pod people. They were hired. They walked right through the front door, resume in hand, while the gatekeepers you romanticize looked the other way. You don't get to pretend it was some cosmic accident. It was negligence dressed up as progress. And all this pearl clutching about mental health? Please. If the woke content in your latest AAA slop sends you spiraling, maybe the problem isn't the industry. Maybe you just need to touch grass, as they say, preferably with both hands, before you start drafting your next manifesto about the trauma of playing a distasteful video game.
As a company grows and eventually opens itself up to investors who utilize ESG as a means to gauge success instead of the product itself, higher-ups chase short-term funding instead of long-term success, and people who don't even play games make choices. To get more customers, something has to be watered down to be less offensive, in turn pushing away the fan base who would have returned time and time again. Charm is lost, boxes are checked, and people blame everyone but themselves.
Blame for what exactly, though? For noticing the obvious? For pointing out the Emperor's buck naked and covered in ESG stickers? Don't insult me. Are you really assuming this wasn't the goal all along? That these companies just oopsie-daisied themselves into soulless corporate pap? No, this was all intentional. The dilution, the pandering, the creative lobotomy, this isn't failure, this is policy. You're not watching a beloved art form accidentally corrode. You're watching it be repurposed into a sermon machine. Sabotaging the charm out of their own games was intentional. Hiring HR commissars to run studios was intentional. These developers worship investors who don't play games because that's where the money is. That's how they make their living.
Despite all of this, despite companies embracing these initiatives and using government bodies around the world to push for them, despite them winning and getting their soapbox that people are practically forced to hear, they're still so angry. How can Matt Henson come out with such an insincere line of thinking? He wanted to make someone mad with the game? The people who you want to make mad will not remain mad. They will move on because that is what a normal, healthy brain does. They may harbor disappointment, but if you think anyone is genuinely mad, Mr. Hanson, The only one left in anger is you. But Matt isn't the only one that we've seen like this. We have endless amounts of tweets where community managers hate gamers, where certain staff hate white men, where consultants hate this, hate that, and they claim that they're the ones with answers. But the only thing that makes them an expert is the fact that they're not white? I don't understand that one. Hate drives these people, and I fear that it comes from a place of trying to reject reality, that they boxed themselves up so tightly to be accepted by a tribe that they forgot that there is fun in creating an imagination. They got their jobs based on hate and needing more of something in an office instead of being hired for their talent. They sell their game based on abject, immutable traits. These are red flags not because of the concepts of diversity, but because they use this as a key selling point. Once they do that, they have to keep drawing attention to it.
Hate and anger are not inherently wrong. They've sparked revolutions, they've forged masterpieces, they've driven invention when comfort never could. Creativity doesn't just come from kumbaya sing-alongs, it comes from friction, from obsession, rage, love, spite, all of it. Passion. What you're doing here isn't moral clarity. This is emotional moralism. You're playing therapist without a diagnosis. Anger, bad. Fun, good. Brilliant axiom. Except it isn't an axiom at all. It's just vibes, and vibes are not a foundation. Moral reality is not determined by your moods or your tribes. Moral reality is determined by God. Period. Without him, you don't have morality, all you have are your feelings. Also, when you peel back the layers of this hatred of white men, what do you actually find? No, it's not about melanin, it's about Christendom. It's about despising the culture and the faith that shaped the very West that you are trying to diagnose. You say white, but what you really mean is Christian. That's the real target. So let's drop the charade. The real problem isn't anger, and it isn't hate. Those are just human conditions capable of producing both rot and beauty. The real problem is the ideology you're carrying water for. A program of erasure where everything that smacks of Christian heritage has to be scrubbed away under the euphemism of diversity. It's replacement, and it's the one thing you won't say out loud because deep down, you know it's true.
Dragon Age Veilguard is a perfect example of how a franchise was built on dark stories and war and pushing the idea of roleplay to now being something safe and whimsical, something easy, something that tells the player what to believe. From a company where you could make your companions so angry they try to kill you, now you can't be mean at all. Everything is an agreement. Everything is corporate sounding and robotic.
Yes, Dragon Age the Veilguard, the tragic descent from grit and war into corporate lullabies. And you're shocked that everything sounds safe, whimsical, sanitized, like a bedtime story with HR holding the flashlight. Let me spell this out for you. Women did this. Feminism did this. Liberalism did this. People like you invited the ideology of safetyism, and now you act surprised when everything is padded and shrink-wrapped. Oh, you want morality back in your games? The thrill of good versus evil? The weight of choices that matter? Funny, because the minute Christians try to bring morality back into this world, say, calling pornography destructive, suddenly morality is oppression. It's Puritanism. Suddenly it's bad. So which is it? Do you actually want morality, or do you just want the cosplay version, the kind that entertains you in fiction but never convicts you in real life? Because the morality you crave in dark stories is the same morality you spit on when it confronts you at the level of your own habits and vices. You can't have it both ways. Funny how people like you reject the source of morality in your own life, and now you wonder, why is my art hollow? You want dark stories? You want stories about war? But what makes them dark? What makes war just or unjust? What should wars be fought over? But you see, the thing is, you can't answer that without a moral compass. You can't even define darkness without the light. And the irony of all ironies, you clutch your pearls over games that tell the player what to believe, all the while writing an essay decrying anger and hate, trying to tell the audience exactly what to believe. Hypocrisy doesn't even begin to cover it.
But the anger continues, and it only grows. Is it the lack of success leading to more anger? Are they angry that they were fed lies and now continue to lash out? They were told that they were the primary voice, but in truth, it was just a house built on sand, and the slightest of shifts has caused it to collapse. They can hate, they can cry, but it won't change the quality of the work that they put out. And when they lash out publicly in today's age of information, the lack of emotional maturity will have real consequences, something I don't think they've ever had to deal with. And this will only fuel more hate in them.
You know, if you assume that all anger and hate is automatically wrong, everything looks like a tantrum. Like, how does the saying go? If you have a hammer, you start looking at every solution as if it's a nail? But what if it's not? What if the so-called lashing out isn't the result of being fed lies, but of deliberate destruction, methodically designed into the very system that you're talking about? So you can wag your finger about emotional maturity all you want. You can pontificate about collapsed houses built on sand, but you stop short of asking the only question that matters. What if this is all intentional? Because if you examine it honestly, the chaos, the anger, the purging of history, the peddling of ideology, none of this is a tantrum. This is strategy. It's all by design. Now, your mistake again is moralizing from your feelings instead of looking at reality. Emotional moralism. It makes everything appear accidental. Everything is tragic. Everything is someone else's fault. But this is not an uncontrolled fire. This fire is exactly where it's supposed to be, burning exactly what the architects want it to burn. What's the other old saying? Never attribute malice to what can be explained by ignorance. This is the reverse. What looks like ignorance, what looks like chaos, what looks like immaturity, lashing out. No, it isn't ignorance at all. This is all malice. This is intentional. Everything is being engineered to collapse.
A child can be taught not to lash out, and their good behavior would get rewarded and reared. But these people are in their 20s, 30s, and sometimes even 40s. They never had their good behavior reared. And those poor behaviors, they're so much more difficult to unlearn now. If you've ever tried to quit a bad habit as an adult, you'll understand that it can be difficult. These people just want the instant gratification, but even if they do get it, it won't ever be enough because it will always cycle back to hate for them, a problem to apparently need solving.
So adults were apparently never reared correctly, doomed by poor childhood habits. And yet John De La Rose posts a simple ad for his book on X, and Madame Savvy erupts like a toddler denied her candy. Who is she to lecture the industry about adults supposedly unable to handle anger, unable to make good games because of their emotions? And the pattern continues. Every sentence bleeds emotional moralism. Every critique boils down to anger, hate, or bad. That's it. That's the axiom. Except, as I said, there is no axiom. She assumes her emotions are the standard of evaluation and everything else, the creators, the industry, the strategy, it's all misbehavior needing mommy's correction. But the reality is the way these people were raised is no different from the rest of their generation. Today's adults are all children. That includes you, that includes me, that includes all of us. You know, the more you grow up, the more you realize how childish all the adults are.
There was never a lack of diversity in games. We had games from studios around the world. It was never a problem when a Chinese studio told Chinese stories, a Japanese studio telling Japanese stories. So why is it a problem in America? Why is there so much hatred around it from people who, seemingly, don't have the skills to back up what they're complaining about? They're not solving a problem. If anything, they've halted the industry. They've made it worse. If a director for Pokemon came out tomorrow saying that they built an entire system around something out of hate, despite it being one of my favorite franchises, that would be so off-putting to read. It would stop being Pokemon and instead be a vehicle of hatred. All I could think about, even if I did try to play it, would be those words of hate. Consumers don't want that. They don't want a story or feature in a game born of childish emotional lashings. It doesn't make any sense at all, especially if you're trying to be as inclusive as possible.
Diversity is code for anti-white, code for anti-Christian, code for erasure of the West. And don't kid yourself, this isn't confined to America. Japan is next. Structurally homogenous, morally oriented, yet even there, wokeness will seep in, slowly poisoning franchises that once carried culture and heritage instead of ideology. This is all an intentional replacement. This is the ideological rot that you refuse to see. Every studio, every franchise, and every supposed bastion of culture will eventually be dragged under the same current.
Make what you're passionate about instead. Stop working in an industry that you hate because it will only grow that anger too. These people lash out and then play the victim. You're entitled to free speech, but it doesn't release you from the burden of consequence. But companies will bring in speakers and tell their staff your ideas deserve to be heard. You deserve to have a voice. All your complaints are valid. No, that's not how life works. Not every idea is good. Not every person has a good voice. And not every complaint is valid.
Oh, the classic platitudes. Follow your passion. Don't work in an industry you hate. How wholesome. How naive. How utterly irrelevant when the passion they're peddling is the destruction of the West. That is the fire in their veins. The education system, saturated with socialism, trained a generation to view everything built by white people, by Christians, as inherently bad. And into that vacuum, they poured feminism, liberalism, and all this woke ideology, all under the threat of the ultimate sin. Racism. And now you all wonder, why is the industry aflame? Why does this anger proliferate? Why does every game seem like a sermon instead of a story? This is consequences of decades of ideological engineering, of teaching generations to hate the very foundations they were built upon. And what, you think lecturing about free speech and personal responsibility is going to fix any of that? Hilarious.
If you say that you hate white men and that there's too many in an industry, first off, why is that even a problem? And second, you know nothing about global demographics and live in a headline-obsessed bubble chasing down tribal markers so that people see you as virtuous, instead of you actually being virtuous. I don't remember Halo being made out of hate. I don't remember anyone on the Halo team saying they hated a demographic. They just made a game that they wanted to play, which is how a lot of games were made. Back when it was actually a challenge to make games, when you had to get hired by a major company to even have any hope of learning tools that are now widely available, nobody did anything out of hate.
Oh, enough with the hate talk already. Every paragraph is like her sermon on how hate is evil, how anger is wrong. Adults don't spontaneously generate malice for white people like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Actions, ideology, design, context, all of these are a result of long-term programming. Nobody wakes up and chooses violence.
It's easier now than ever to make games. But these people, through the advances of technology, they got their jobs without skills and they brought their hate with them. All they have are tears and HR threats. These consultant groups born from hate and negative emotion, instead of teaching groups of people to start new studios and tell new stories, demand access to existing studios. And if they don't get it, they label them names. They take advantage of fear, but no more.
These people didn't storm studios or demand access. They were hired like anyone else. The system is working exactly as intended, except what they brought with them wasn't skill alone. It was ideology, identity politics, fear, and a worldview shaped by decades of cultural programming. White people have been trained from youth to quake at the word racist and bend under that pressure. That is conditioning. That is structural influence. We should not treat our current state of affairs as if any of this is accidental, as if every outcome was an oopsie. No, this is all the predictable result of hiring decisions under ideological currents. And let's be honest, this is not something you solve overnight, nor is it last year's issue. Woke is not a glitch you can patch, and it's not going away just because a couple of influencers on X or YouTube are screaming into the void. Lolberts like you, like Smash JQ, like Grums and Asmongold. All of you desperately want to believe that the culture war is won, that woke is dead. Newsflash, it isn't. Wokeness is generational. It will persist as long as the boomers and much of the millennial cohort are alive, because it is embedded in institutions, in education, in hiring, and in culture. No amount of outrage, no amount of moralizing, none of your bitter tantrums on social media will change that. That is just the way it is. History will not bend to your desires. History moves in long arcs, and we're stuck somewhere in the middle.
I'll leave you with what is my unfortunate but favorite example right now. CD Projekt Red, makers of Cyberpunk 2077 and The Witcher, I believe was bullied into becoming the monster that we see today. Back before CP77 dropped, an individual named Cypher on Twitter went on quite the tirade, calling them transphobic and racist. She said things no professional individual would ever say if they intend to work with a company. But within a few months, she was given all sorts of gifts, and the complaints stopped. Cypher has access to DEI groups. One she started herself, but she was also on the board of several others. She didn't get gifted anything because of the size of her platform. Sure, she has followers, but she doesn't drive viewership or engagement herself. She's not capable of being useful in a marketing campaign. However, she is connected to a web that controls so much right now, and I firmly believe CDPR only adopted all of the DEI because They set up an American office, they were bullied into it, and believe it will lead them to success. But this will not happen. One of their other staff told a woman to stop complaining and called her a clown for mentioning DEI. Why didn't she get sent the free gifts? Or does it only work if you use the cancel words? How many more people do this? How many other companies have been bullied like this? I'm thankful that the truth can come out, but we're still left with so many who get to where they are through hate. And I think that's quite sad. There's no greater joy, in my opinion, than being part of creating, be it words or art, something physical, something digital, or if you want to get really abstract, life itself.
Notice the framing. CD Projekt Red was bullied, a classic oppressed versus oppressor narrative. Except, is the supposed bully actually in the wrong here? To claim bullying, to claim injustice, is to make a moral argument. And to make a moral argument, you need an axiom, a grounding principle, a standard of right and wrong. And she has none. Madame Savvy just reads the narrative the way she wants to, applies her feelings as if they're law, and declares virtue and vice accordingly. The only thing left is projection. She assumes aggression equals wrongdoing, and any deviation from her emotional standard is an attack. And look, I'm not saying this because I personally disagree with her conclusions. I'm saying all this because I can actually formulate a moral argument that is not grounded in my feelings. John De La Rose can do the same, because we have an axiom, a foundation to build from, Christian morality. And from there you can judge right from wrong. You can evaluate intent. You can assess consequences. Madame Savvy, on the other hand, she has feelings. She reads chaos is accidental, bullying is always wrong, anger is immoral, and ideology is a personal affront, but she can't justify any of it beyond emotional reactions. This is why her entire video collapses the moment you ask, what standard are you using? What principles are you appealing to? Because without an axiom, without a fundament, every bully could just as easily be a creator exercising strategy, ideology, or power. Her moralism collapses under scrutiny because she cannot justify why one side is right or the other is wrong. She only knows that she feels that they are wrong. And that right there is also the problem with all these lolberts. Smash JQ, Grums, Asmongold, they're all standing on fragments of Christian capital, cultural memory, inherited intuition about right and wrong. But when push comes to shove, they have no real grounds to stand on. Their platforms, their arguments, all their influence, it's all built on sand.
Thank you all for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed my little ramble. I'm sorry that it was focused around hate, but in the end, love will win. I know that our recent pushback is a movement built out of love and not hate. As much as they want to cry and kick and scream about it, it won't change the fact that the average consumer is done being preached to. I'm not standing here from a moral authority. Instead, it's actually quite the opposite. I don't want to decide what should or shouldn't be allowed. I just want everyone to be able to create. And that is what the industry used to be, an open market of ideas, limitless possibilities. So it's important, now more than ever, to support the people that you love and make something yourself. Have a good day, everyone.
Ah, yes, the closing flourish. Love will win. Which love exactly, Savvy? God's love, that's what. John De La Rose has been projecting that all along, by the way, by virtue of his prayers and his expressions of faith. Yet, she hates that. And no matter how much you cry, kick, and scream on X, the gospel permeates every corner. And only by the power of Christ can you cut through every vice. And then we get this confession. I'm not standing here from a moral authority. Right, which is why you will lose. You made a 10-minute video decrying wokeness and gaming, yet you insist you have no authority to decide what should or shouldn't exist. You're just a toothless lolbert at the microphone. You just want everyone to be able to create. Right, and who enforces that? I mean, you can't keep your liberties if they aren't enforced, right? And if someone does enforce it, doesn't that enforcement itself become an authority? You see how your vision collapses under its own contradictions? No axiom, no authority, no principle, yet you want everyone to follow your moral tale. That's why your idea of love, absent God, absent grounding, is impotent. Without an axiom, without divine guidance, all your preaching is just noise.